Hi everyone, and welcome to the Friday, November 5th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson, our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, so let's start, Scott. Let's start with Zillow. What a strange story. I mean, you think of Zillow now as almost a utility. It's there and it's trustworthy and it'll go on forever. And you don't have to think about it. All of a sudden...
Yeah, and I wonder how employees of Zillow felt given that we're in the biggest housing boom in history and they talk about housing prices. They're so beloved that people talk about surfing Zillow just aspirationally.
Yes.
You know, to see the houses.
How much is my house worth this week?
Right, or just to see the houses we know we can't afford. I mean,
Right.
Saturday Night Live did a skit about surfing Zillow in our free pandemic time, and it just got that much into the cultural zeitgeist.
Those employees must have thought they were at the new HP, that you just work 50 years and retire with your gold watch and your stock options.
Yeah, stock options, which were doing really well, and then a couple of things happened that were unexpected. One, it got out that Zillow was actually buying houses and then turning around and selling them, which on one level seems, I guess, to make sense because everybody's buying and selling houses, but Zillow should be above it all.
Yeah, but it doesn't make sense. That
Right.
literally puts Zillow in competition with its customers. That's
Right.
always a mistake.
Right. And if you're buying a house that Zillow owns, or if you're a company that's buying a house that Zillow owns to turn around, right, what's the point of going to Zillow to check out the price? Do you trust it anymore?
Yeah, they're the enemy now.
They have a stake. They have skin in the game. Then, even more shockingly, was the earning report that came out earlier this week that not only did Zillow lose money in its housing business, which is amazing if you say that out loud, but they're going to have to cut a full 25% of its staff.
Work for it. The stock went in the toilet.
And the stock fell for the first time in a while. And this is interesting because this is either going to be, I'm not sure, a footnote in the business school teachings of the housing boom that the Silicon Valley saw during this age, or maybe a whole chapter on it, because Zillow played several roles, and yet, if you think about it, is the only entity to lose money during the housing boom that we're in.
Well, you got to wonder, is this an augury of things to come? Because we've been reading that the housing market is being slowly taken, the available housing in the United States is being taken over by these large organizations that are buying them up and turning them into rentals.
Right.
Now, does the Zillow collapse suggest that that model isn't working anymore? Or there's a backlash? Or just Zillow didn't know what they were doing, flipping houses?
It may be that last one because if you think about it, we all anecdotally know people who buy houses and turn them into rental properties.
Sure.
And lately that's been printing money.
Yes.
Now, it wasn't always that way. 2008, we saw a lot of people, really get hit hard, and I assume that that's going to happen again sometime in the near future. We'll have a dip.
Right.
But yeah, to see any sort of entity buy up houses to sell them and lose a ton of money means the algorithm or whatever they were using is way off. And this is a way that technology, and we've been talking about this with Facebook bringing people together and yet having all these problems. Here's technology that was in use that kind of screwed it all up.
And everybody who's listening to this, it's either has a rental or has ever bought a house somewhere and moved away and then had to sell it. It's a lot more complicated and a lot more demanding of your time and attention than you assume it is. There's no such thing as a turnkey landlord or owner.
Right.
You've got to stay on top of this stuff. And I wonder how many pigs in a poke Zillow bought. Even though they knew the value, they didn't know the community, and they couldn't maintain them long enough to turn them over.
Every once in a while you'll see, or we all know realtors, and they get really mad at the idea that the technology's stepping in to take their jobs. There's some.
At Century 21, they're throwing their jackets in the air with excitement.
Century 21, right? The realtor that, just like you said, knows the community, knows the value of the nearby houses, the comps, as they say. Right now is saying, haha, you do need a human touch. This can't be done just by technology. Yes. And whereas I certainly feel bad for the 25% of employees losing that, that's a huge number.
They did a good job.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't like Zillow was had the problems of Facebook or something where you couldn't trust them with information. Like I said, they were a utility. They were like the library. You went on there every day and you checked and you felt like, okay, well, this is an honest appraisal. This is the state of the market.
We believed them, yeah.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, they lost a lot of trust because of all things they got in the housing market.
Yeah.
And maybe they just shouldn't have. Maybe that's how Zillow flies too close to the sun.
If I was those 25% of employees, I'd go start an alternative competitor to Zillow and promise users that they will never compete with you. Yeah.
Well, there are competitors out there, and that's sort of what I
these
expect
guys are all trained pros. They know the game inside and out.
True.
They could probably get VC money tomorrow if they had a leader.
It's that kind of a market, and we have seen the other companies, whether they deal with rentals or sales, and that's where I get a lot of information on the housing market, and they've done huge business.
Okay, I hear a phone going in the background.
I didn't know if that was a phone or a cuckoo clock.
It's actually a phone.
All right.
Facebook, or should we call it Meta now,
Right.
is saying we'll get rid of facial recognition systems to track us. Okay, do you believe them? The first thing people notice is interesting timing, that they're going to get out of facial recognition. Supposedly they're destroying a billion files of people's faces.
Yes.
But Facebook says it's doing it. But Meta, they kind of backtracked a couple of days ago, right? They make the big announcement, and now they're saying, well, Meta is still going to be in the avatar Meta world, and suggesting, oh no, they're actually going to keep those facial recognition files. It's just going to be a Meta project, not a Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp feature.
I mean, the one thing that we've known about Facebook and facial recognition is how we tag people, or they tag you. And there are privacy concerns even with that, not to mention the data that's stored because of facial recognition. And the other thing that Facebook said, and this is Facebook, not yet Meta, but Facebook saying, well, we're going to stop it for now. Now, we're not going to say we're never going to.
It's always for now. It's
right.
always for now from those guys.
Yeah, and they need some good publicity because their response to all of the last stuff that we've heard in the past month, not even to mention going back to Cambridge Analytica, was literally to change its name. And not in a smooth, easy way. They changed it to Meta, whatever the heck that is.
Yeah.
So people are not only scratching their heads,
the
they're
good news
still
is
angry.
we don't have to listen to artsy types talk about Meta.
Yes, we do.
Well,
Come on,
that's very meta.
Yeah,
At least that's now disappeared from the discourse.
No, but the other thing that they need to do is get some good publicity, and I think that's what this is. It's a PR move to say, okay, one of those things that you've always been angry about is going to temporarily go away.
I have to agree with Frances Haugen, the whistleblower. She said, check. I mean, we're back to trust but verify with Facebook now, because everything they do is loaded with an exit strategy.
Yeah, I don't even know if you're at trust.
Yeah. Good
Maybe
point.
just verify.
Yeah, just verify. So is it going to hurt Facebook's bottom line? They were trying to get to improve their stock value. Will it hurt their bottom line?
The stock didn't move much on the news, and I think that facial recognition is not the data trove that some of the other call them privacy violations are. I mean, in other words, we give all this information to Facebook. I get that. It's up to us to not believe what we read on Facebook, and also to not give them personal information.
But it could be a treasure trove in the metaverse where you go on a Zoom call and your avatar appears with your face, right? That becomes a value added.
Yeah, the thing about the metaverse is, let's call it another platform.
Yes.
There's Instagram, there's Facebook, and now there's this sort of VR metaverse.
Right.
And that's another platform for our data to be protected, if you ask me, perhaps taken if you ask Facebook. And so I want to hear what happens in this next platform and what safeguards are there so we don't have yet another situation where, a Cambridge Analytica is allowed to come in and siphon our data from our cartoon avatars like they did from our real personas.
Exactly. This reminds me of IBM in the early 60s. And I think that's why Facebook keeps saying for now. Because these guys are not dumb. They know what they're doing. They know their history. And they know that IBM was so predatory and so unstoppable that finally the feds came in with antitrust after they took out Burroughs and Univac and all the rest of the mainframe companies. And it froze IBM. So it managed to get into mini computers, but it stayed away from personal computers. and missed the first great boom because it was afraid to get into another market. And I wonder if this is Facebook saying, yeah, we'll go along with you guys, we'll go along with Congress, and we'll go along with the SEC, but we're going to reserve the right to come roaring back out if another competitor or platform appears we want.
Yeah, Facebook, even while stepping back and changing its name and admitting some of these problems, is still coming out with the metaverse. They're still coming out with their Ray-Ban glasses, although they say those won't have facial recognition, but you can still record and you have cameras and all that stuff.
Yeah, just turn the camera around.
Right.
That's not that hard.
Well, it's going to be a privacy nightmare again. And so Facebook isn't slowing down on any of this stuff, even while it tries to, I guess, placate the privacy advocates to an extent, which is good. They need to do that, and I'd like to see them do it more.
It's trying to thread the needle.
Right, because it's one thing to say, I'm sharing, pictures of vacations with my friends, but when that friend turns around and starts writing about, hey, don't get a vaccine, or these conspiracy theories, then it's like, well, wait a minute, what in the world is Facebook for? And I think that's a big question.
Well, you talk about fake information. Wait till your avatar starts advocating things you don't believe in.
Oh, well, yeah.
By the way, have you tried ban roll-on?
Well, it'll be like the Truman Show where the characters would break out and
everybody
say, hey, try
breaks
this cereal.
out the product placement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on to the story of your life. Your good friend Elizabeth Holmes and the Theranos trial.
Yes.
This week
really came down to two things. And I think one, even though both were by the prosecution, I think one helped the prosecution and one might have hurt. The prosecution pointed out that Theranos used logos on their test memos from both Pfizer and Schering-Plough. Mm-hmm. We had people on the stand to say Pfizer and Schering-Plough did not give their permission for that.
Right.
So here Elizabeth Holmes is courting investors with the seeming backing of two gigantic companies, one of which, Pfizer, is out there saving lives with the vaccine. Now, granted, this wasn't that time, but Pfizer is gigantic, Schering-Plough is gigantic, they have good reputations, and their logos were used, apparently, according to testimony, without permission.
Okay. You could have spotted every entrepreneur in that courtroom by the ones that looked at their hands when they mentioned putting a bigger company's logo on your letterhead. Because
so you're saying that's common?
Oh, God, yes.
Even without permission?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, absolutely. You got to be careful, but I swear, you got to make yourself. It's like dealing with a bear coming at you. You got to be, and the bears are the VCs. You got to look at as big as you can, and that goes on every single day. Oh yes, we're talking to.
Yeah.
You had one phone call, and the receptionist said he's not taking any phone calls, and you put on a thing we've spoken to. So I don't think that hurt her too much.
If that didn't hurt, then what else didn't hurt, I don't think, is the parade of big investors, or at least people representing the big investors. And this was where the big money came out.
This was Henry Kissinger week.
Right. It was Kissinger week. It was Betsy DeVos week. It was the Walton family week. Now, the Walton family and the DeVos family, we're talking $110 million invested in Theranos.
Right.
Kissinger, not as much, but he was on the board. The Cox family, big media family, and some others, all represented by one lawyer. Now, the DeVos family had another financial representative. She was on the stand. This one lawyer was on the stand talking about essentially the lack of due diligence that these rich people did.
Yeah. So the lawyer didn't warn him.
Right.
He's going to be a mall lawyer.
I guess so, and the financial planner. But these are people with such extreme wealth.
Yes.
That I wonder if the jury is going to feel sorry for them because they were perhaps, I don't know, can we use the word scam? That's sort of why we're in court.
For these people, $10 million is coffee money, And even if it's $500 million, that's they make that much in interest.
Right. And so the fact that they lost that money and the defense was able to step in and really interestingly just point out, hey, if I were to invest a whole lot of money, I would look into this.
Yes.
And couldn't you guys have called Pfizer and Schering-Plough? Their logos were right there. And they really broke these guys down to the point where they were admitting we were just really excited about Theranos and really taken by Elizabeth Holmes.
You know what? Two things. First one is, given the amount of money she raised, it's kind of amazing they didn't come up with something that worked.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just physically impossible to do what they were trying to do. Otherwise, $500 million, you ought to be able to come up with something to show that, the investors. Second thing is, I heard from our old friend Steve Millard, the most connected man in Silicon Valley, and he pointed me to a comment in the Wall Street Journal where a biotech guy wrote in and said, "Oh, I looked at Theranos and immediately dismissed it for two reasons. One of them was the CEO had no background in the subject, and the second one was I looked at the board and there were no experts there. There were just big famous names, like they were just stacking the deck, with famous people to get more money." He said, backed away immediately. You had said that weeks ago, that it was interesting that no biotech companies put money into this project.
Right. And that was, according to the defense, what the investor should have been looking at too.
Yeah.
And, early on, if you watch the documentary and read the book Bad Blood, one of Elizabeth Holmes' early Stanford professors was out there, because she's in the documentary saying this wasn't physically possible.
Yeah.
And some of the scientists who worked at Theranos, who later talked to John Carreyrou for the book Bad Blood, said, we could have been onto something, but there were a couple of things that were just physically impossible that she insisted on.
Yeah.
And those were impediments. And you think about, what we've heard from some of the Apple engineers through the years. That, wait a minute, that's not possible. Yeah. And maybe they made it work. And so that's how you got the iPhone or the iPod. And so future generations.
I've been covering semiconductors for 40 years. We were supposed to hit a wall of physics, quantum effects, bumpy surfaces from atoms on the gates and all that. We overcame every one of them over the years. Seemingly impossible stuff. So, you can kind of see how an investor who isn't really deep down in this could think, well, yeah, it looks impossible, but these guys are going to pull it off.
Right, because that precedent had been set by Steve Jobs and the chip guys and all that. So they kept on going, and they kept on raising money and spending money.
Well, and it's interesting. You heard a testimony that Holmes was looking for, quote, high-quality families to invest in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's another problem with a phrase like that to a jury that I assume is not made up of multimillionaires.
Yeah, you're not high quality. We never would have gone to you.
Right. And they're so, I'll put this in quotes, high quality, they sent representatives to testify. Am I going to feel bad for a multi-millionaire who isn't even showing up in court, who has someone else to admit, we didn't really do our homework?
Yeah, we didn't actually read the paperwork.
That's why I wonder if some of this week wasn't actually good for the defense.
Interesting. Okay, you had a brief interruption, I understand.
Yes, Judge Davila is constantly talking about how loud journalists type in the courtroom. It's come up 4 or 5 times, and
loud on their phones. I mean, they're not.
No, typing on the laptops.
Well, what did they do 50 years ago when everybody came in with a Royal typewriter?
Well, look, I didn't spend much time in court, not to mention 50 years ago or even now. One guy actually took a photo with his cell phone in the actual courtroom, which is a big no-no. And so the judge had him up in front and center and gave him a real tongue lashing.
Good dressing down.
Yeah.
Was this guy a pro, or was this guy from some publication that doesn't usually cover trials?
Neither. This was a, what do you call it? Tourist, someone who wants to take in the trial. And I've talked to many of these people. They show up either because they really like Elizabeth Holmes or they're just fascinated with the trial. And so far, there have been enough seats for many people to sort of, for some people to check it out. And I think that's fascinating. They'll take some time off work just to see the
So is there
Silicon
like just
Valley
a flash all of a sudden?
No, someone saw this man take a photo.
Hey, think about how much a paparazzi would get paid for a shot from inside the courtroom.
Right, and you don't have to be a longtime court reporter, and I'm not, to know that the sanctity and the privacy of the jury is super, super important in something like this. I mean, there have been a couple of times where somebody has slipped up, and I found myself on an elevator with a juror or two.
Yes.
And I immediately turn my face. I don't say any words. I'm already masked.
Yeah, I mean, we have a history of mob trials where,
Well, no. I mean, right, but they're
you know
not
what I mean?
supposed to
They're
have
vulnerable.
any. Right.
They're very vulnerable.
They're not supposed to have any interaction with the press.
Right.
And I obviously respect that. I don't want to talk to these people. I want the trial to go on. And so I turn my face. I don't want anyone, and I don't want any recognition. I don't want any words to pass, because every day the judge will say, "You didn't talk about this with anybody, did you?" And for whatever reason, that's only happened, once. But there were no words, no even eye contact. It's just important, I think, to keep that separate. And someone taking a photo in the courtroom
and
is.
they pick up the faces of the jurors. You
Right.
could see a law firm locating, now that we have facial recognition from Facebook, locating a key jury and working on them.
So someone instantly went to that person, I guess the bailiff or whatever, and said, "We need you to delete that." He insisted he did. He was very sorry, and the trial moved on.
Didn't take the phone or anything. That's interesting.
Didn't take the phone.
Okay, Runway. I haven't followed them too much, but I did know that they had a woman CEO, COO, and CFO, and they were they're the first company with that configuration to go public.
Yeah,
So that was a big deal.
It is a big deal, and we're starting to see that obviously more women in the C-suite. Not nearly enough, but we're starting to see more. We're also starting to see more women leading funding rounds in the VC side. Again, a paltry number. We need much more. But the idea that the reason some of these stories are important is to simply poke a hole in the idea that, well, if the money comes from a female VC and it's all leadership, it won't make as much money.
Yeah, it's a tough guy business.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like what Hollywood was saying about, minorities, and I throw Black Panther at them. That movie made $1 billion. Can we just let everybody make movies because there's so much money out there?
Now, Runway was a women's fashion company, right? You could buy couturier products.
Yeah, right. It's fashion and it's clothing, and there are a lot of these companies out there that are doing it in a little bit of a different way, where they're trying to be green, a little more green, and get away from the fast fashion.
So what distinguished Runway?
I mean, it's C-suite really.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first.
But I mean, did they have a competitive business model that, rose above all the other ones? Were they that distinct?
We'll find out. I mean, now they've got some cash in the bank to.
So they went public.
And remember, these are largely online companies that deal in clothes, and boy, did they see a big boost in business during the pandemic.
Yeah, you're not going into stores.
Right, and so, I mean, I look at myself even right now, and I'm wearing clothing I had a long time ago that I think, well, I really need to update my threads, but am I going to go into a dressing room? They weren't even open for a long time.
Right,
and so the idea...
Try on clothes somebody else just tried on.
Right, but if you go online, and all these companies, Zappos, the shoe company, sort of premiered this years and years ago. Okay, if it doesn't fit, hey, just send it back, we'll take care of it. But give it a try. And with shipping so fast, it really became a way for people to update their wardrobe at a time when we couldn't go clothes shopping.
Yeah, now we're seeing a bunch of them, right? We got Warby Parker with the eyeglasses. Next, I guess. No, it follows. It already happened. And then coming up is Allbirds.
Allbirds went public on Wednesday. Of this week.
Missed it.
Yeah, it did very well. It was up like 90%. And
well, we know Runway got 1.7. They had a valuation of 1.7 billion. That's the good news. The bad news is their stock dropped 8%, 9%
on day one.
On day one, yeah. Have they come back?
They've come back a little bit. It's still bopping around a lot, and
so were they overpriced, or does the market have doubts about the strength of this kind of online company as the pandemic ends?
It's a good question, because we're starting to see the pandemic winners take hits. Thursday morning, Moderna says in its earnings, well, okay, we don't expect to make quite as much as we did with COVID vaccine doses, which if you think about it makes sense. I mean, we're not doing 2 anymore. Many people are getting the 1 booster, but then what happens?
Yes.
I happen to think, I mean, we're probably going to need more shots as we go ahead, but Moderna admitting it may not make as much money on that as it did. We've seen Zoom stock dip a bit, and so it's all the more impressive that an Allbirds goes public and just rips it up. Perhaps they were underpriced, but there's still this desire to get in on companies that do online business, because
but what you don't want to see is the same old argument. See, this is what happens when companies run only by women.
Well,
you don't want it to get read that way.
No, and I wouldn't read it that way. I think this is a company that is one of many in a space that managed to rise above, get a bunch of funding, go public,
Yeah.
and now has extra cash to whatever, acquire others. You know, we have so many companies doing this, and that's a danger, right? So what do you usually see when companies like Run the Runway and
Yeah.
when these guys get money, they consolidate, they buy other companies. And we might see that because, right, if you're holding shares in a company that does online fashion, you know you've got a whole bunch of competitors out
Yes.
there. And how do you know you're going to rise above the others? Maybe you'll just buy them instead.
Yeah, no, just start sweeping them up. Just wait until stock values drop again. Hope yours is the last to drop and you got enough cash on hand.
Well, in other words, a lot of these companies that are involved in shopping need to go shopping. And
Yes.
yet, that was bad for Zillow.
Yeah.
As we bring it all full circle.
Well, don't go vertical. Go horizontal.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you read this stuff about Elon Musk, where a guy in charge of the World Food Program at the UN said, well, you know, if Elon Musk would just put up $6 billion, we could feed 42 million people.
Right.
And the lesson of this is do not screw with Elon Musk.
Especially on Twitter.
Especially on Twitter, because he basically destroyed them, saying, well, you know, you guys raised 5.3 million. How many people did you feed with that money? And also, give me your plan for feeding people.
It's always easy to say, hey, if only Elon Musk would donate 8% of whatever, we'd solve
because he's
whatever.
rich.
Right. And I get it. You know, if you're the
Sure.
number one guy, pick on him. Make him spend his money and make him tell us where he's spending his money.
Right.
But yeah, come up with a plan. And that's what Musk said. Hey, I'll sell Tesla stock today.
Yeah, in a heartbeat.
If I can do that, because Musk is no dummy. He's, you know, careless, but he's no dummy. And he knows if he can stop world hunger, woof, that's not a bad legacy.
Yeah, you know, you get the Nobel Prize in the process.
Right. But you really do need a plan. And Twitter is, you know, there are certain people you just don't come for.
Yes.
Musk is one of them.
Yes, he's one of them.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is another one.
Yes.
Don't come for them unless you plan to get, you know,
annihilated.
Yeah. And the good thing to come out of this, and it's rare when we say the good thing to come out of anything Elon Musk has to do with social media, but the good thing to come out of this is maybe a dialogue and maybe some money actually gets put towards this. And then maybe other quadrillionaires say, wait, oh, I want to bid on that. I'm going to solve the water crisis in the Sudan or whatever. And then we have some true philanthropy happening. But really come up with a plan. Don't just come up with a clever tweet.
Yeah, this guy was just taking a flyer, trying to get attention. Well, speaking of Tesla, Tesla's China sales have now grown to nearly half the size of the company's U.S. sales, 3 billion to 7 billion. Okay, you know that's not real comforting because every time China gets a major market share of a company's sale, percentage of a company's sales, it starts pushing that company around. I mean, we watched the NBA. You know, is this a good thing? I mean, can Elon resist the pressures of the Chinese government?
I don't know that anyone has, but boy, Tesla, I mean, look at the stock price the last few weeks. It's gone up by hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you have a Hertz out there saying, yeah, we're going to buy 100,000 Teslas.
Right.
100,000 of a car company that, you know, sort of trickles these cars out.
Yeah.
I mean, they are going to be busy for the foreseeable future. And they just, for all of the weird delays and, you know, here's this robot and the Cybertruck we've never seen, for whatever reason, they're just cranking it out. And they, I mean, I get it. I see why investors are so excited about this stock, as precariously high as it is. You know, they don't put out a whole lot of product, but it seems like all the product they have is accounted for a long time.
You get nervous when a company seems to be defying gravity, but Tesla's been doing it for a long time now.
It's true. It's true. And again, the stock market is how people think the future will look. And the future looks pretty good for Tesla.
In related news about China, Yahoo has now pulled out of China. I was going to say that's like that terrible statement. The least read story, least important story of the week is wheat production in Manitoba. Well, does anybody still use Yahoo?
No, I mean, I think it's part of the Verizon thing. And no.
I mean, we all go to Yahoo Business at some point to get the headlines, but I mean,
fantasy footballers are still there.
Who would have thought that Yahoo's the last thing standing at Yahoo would be a news service.
Yeah, I mean, Yahoo Finance is still good, and people use their email for fantasy football, but that's, I honestly, I've talked to people, and that's about it. There's not.
And we should point that out to all new entrepreneurs. This company was the biggest company, it's the hottest company in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
In your lifetime, it's gone. It's essentially just an empty shell. Okay, read about Squid Game this week?
Yes.
Did you know it had a cryptocurrency?
I did, just because I follow crypto pretty closely. But the easy question to ask would be, what's the end game to this squid currency? How can you cash it in? And people, I wouldn't even say invest.
But it had a rally to $2,800, which is what it was, something like 280,000% jump over the course of a few days.
Right, but again, nothing was backing
it. Yeah.
I mean, talking about, as we did earlier with the Theranos investors in your podcast, investors in Squid Game, who I'm guessing weren't quite as wealthy as Betsy DeVos, lost all their money. And really, don't jump into these crypto coins.
Is the very definition of caveat emptor.
Yes.
Just be so careful.
Beware.
Oh, we all love Steve Wozniak. I mean, he says what he thinks, and he doesn't care. And bless him for it. He's been this way since I was a kid. I mean, we were neighbors. I mean, he's always been just straightforward and no artifice. So Steve Wozniak said he finds the recently released iPhone 13 to be virtually indistinguishable from the device's previous incarnations. Quote, "I got the new iPhone. I can't tell the difference, really. The software that in it applies to the older iPhones, I presume." Now, there's the kind of advertising quote you want if you're an Apple computer. Founder Steve Jobs.
I can't tell the difference.
Our vital new product is indistinguishable from all the ones before it.
I mean, hey, welcome to the world of tech reporting.
Yeah,
Steve.
And welcome to the world of Steve Wozniak.
Right. We've always enjoyed his candor, and he's right. I mean, these phones are incremental iterations from the last one. We know this. It's been this way. It's hard to imagine anything else. And, bravo to Samsung and Apple and Google for trying and for maybe improving the camera a bit or the battery life. But really, it's tough.
This is a perfected product.
Yeah.
We need something brand new to come out. And I don't know. I like I've said before, I'm not sure without Steve Jobs, Apple is the company that's going to do it. It could come from somewhere else.
I don't know. The only
but
real
it's a commodity
changes.
now.
Right.
It's a commodity.
Exactly.
Now it's going to be a price war in the years to come.
Right. Well, and that's why, just to bring Tesla briefly into this, the Cybertruck is a big risk.
Yes.
Because trucks are a commodity. Everyone loves trucks. We're trying to convince people to go to EV trucks. All right, that's going to be a big move. I think we can do it. But do you want your EV truck to look like, some polygonal thing out of a video game?
Especially when Detroit is coming out now with some really interesting retro-looking EV trucks.
Right. It's going to be tough to really alter the cell phone game because it's gotten so good and so utilitized. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Utilitarian? I don't know.
No, utilitarian.
We all use them.
I think you've coined a new word.
We all use them all the time.
Yes.
And for the most part, people seem satisfied. So it's a risk to take a big move at this point.
Right. Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.